this is the way we get to know you. And so applications without an interview are really just less exciting than if we get to see you in person and hear you talking.
I think one of the wonderful things about Initial View is that it is a way to add personality to your application. Your application is flat, right? It is the pieces that have made up part of your journey through high school and just part of your journey. It's never all of who you are. But your interview gives us insight into how you think about the world and the passion that you have for the change that you want to make, right? Or the drive that you have to learn something new, or the fact that you don't know any of that yet. All of that comes through when you really get to have a conversation with someone.
My colleague Annie Sullivan and I really rely on Initial View a lot with the applications in which students have submitted a video. It's just such a great tool to make an application that's two-dimensional until we watch the video really come alive. And what we're looking for is, we're looking for a little bit of spontaneity. The Initial View interviewers ask some questions that you might expect, but they also ask questions that you probably wouldn't expect and that the students couldn't necessarily prepare for. And so we want to see how the students think on their feet. We want to see if they get flustered when something happens that they didn't expect, or whether they can adapt. And the students who are going to be most successful are the ones who don't get too rattled when something unexpected comes their way.
In terms of what we're looking to identify in the interview, we want to get a sense for what are you like? What are your quirks? What are your interests? What are the things that you care about and you're passionate about? And sometimes that doesn't come through in the application. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for you to just be yourself. We really spend a lot of time looking to see whether or not you seem authentic, and whether you're showing us your real self. And those are very kind of real things for the admissions officer. We finally get to connect with a student who otherwise was just kind of a piece of paper.
One time within an interview, Initial View really helped us dive into a student that on paper had really common interests for our applicant pool. Through the interview, we really understood why she was so interested in psychology, why she got excited about how the brain worked and the connections, and how that also tied into her cultural heritage. And it really helped us see beyond just that she was a student who was applying to one of our most popular majors, but really what made her excited about that and what she would add to our community.
We are very much building a community when we are reviewing applications. And so we do absolutely have conversations about is the student going to be a good roommate? What is the student going to be like in the classroom? Is this the type of student who's going to seek out professors because they're simply interested in what they're doing? Initial View enables us to really get to know the student in a wonderful and unique way. And frankly, it's a great way for students to make their application stand out.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are coming from, zooming in from, logging in from for Tuesday Talks. We're so happy you're here. As we are getting ourselves situated here, if you would like some Chinese translation, 如果需要中文服务的话, make sure you go to our 小儿通. I'm going to put up a QR code right now to make sure that you're in the right place. I think we're streaming correctly over there. So if you want Chinese, if you need 中文翻译的话, 扫这个二维码. Go ahead and scan that QR code and it'll bring you where you need to be. We're also live streaming on YouTube if that's helpful. If Zoom is not cooperating for you tonight or today, go ahead and hop over there and you'll be able to see the same presentation. We're also going to probably play Spot Mr. View. So get your side gallery ready here so that you can see all of our windows, because Mr. View might pop up somehow, somewhere during our conversation. And if you take a screenshot and send an email to us, we will send you a little prize. So make sure you have your screenshot fingers ready or your cameras ready to take a photo. And I just want to say another big thank you to all of our sponsor schools. It is because of you all that we continue to have Tuesday Talks. And thank you for telling all your friends and your family members and your your friends of other schools even to come listen to these talks, because we want to make sure that we have lots of transparent conversation throughout our application process, whether you are in grade 10 or if you are in grade 12, just about to apply. So before we dive into today's topic, I do want to encourage you all, go ahead and open up your chat box and open up your Q&A box, because I want this to be dynamic, organic. And so if you have a question, even now, you're like, I came here because I want to know about the UC system and I'm like a little bit worried, go ahead and throw your questions in there, because I want to be able to fold that into the conversation. I know at the end, we always run out of time for Q&A. So if you have questions, go ahead and send them in now so that we can try to talk about those things. And then, so before we start diving into the actual topic, I'm going to have my guests introduce themselves. They're going to say hi and tell you what their name is and what they do, and a little bit about their specific institution, and then we will get started. So, Sam, do you want to start us off?
Thank you, Gloria. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. My name is San Lee. I work for UC Davis. I'm an associate director at International Admissions. I love being at UC Davis. I enjoy doing this. This is actually my 11th year being at International Admissions at UC Davis. So very exciting time. Also, Beatrice and I have been doing a lot of presentation together, so I appreciate the partnership. And also, Gloria, thank you again for inviting us. It's been a pleasure doing Tuesday Talks. It's one of the most fun webinar I've been doing. So every year I look forward to the invitation. Thank you.
Well, I could not have said it better. Good morning, good evening, and good night, maybe, wherever you are. I'm Beatrice Atkinson Myers. I'm the Associate Director of Admissions Outreach and Recruitment for UC Santa Cruz. I have also had the pleasure of working in undergraduate admissions for about 20 years at UC Santa Cruz. So I just have to say these chats are so much fun. We love connecting with all of you who are students and counselors and parents, and Initial View always does such a wonderful job of helping to facilitate these conversations so you all really know what it is we do, because we want you to be successful. So happy to be here this morning.
Awesome. And I want to know who is here. So I'm going to launch a quick poll here. And if you have your Zooms open, you should see a question right now that says, where are you in this process? So we want to know, are you a parent, a counselor, a student? And if you're a student, how old you are, basically, because that will also help us in our conversation when we talk about timeline and where you're supposed to be, what you're supposed to be thinking about. And so if you haven't answered the question yet, there's still like 1 more minute to do this. And right now it looks like more than half of you are applying to college this year. So this is a very relevant topic right now. You're like, I'm getting ready to write these PIQs. I want to hear, I want to hear about what's important for you to understand about me. Yeah, we're still kind of at the 50% mark of students who are applying right now. So that's exciting. Wonderful. Well, as we start the conversation, let's go ahead and I'm going to put up a chat question, because I love starting with a chat question. I want to see where you all are feeling. My first question of the day is, what does a test score tell you about a student? And I'm saying this because we named this talk, We Don't Talk About You Know. And I hope everybody got that reference. It's from We Don't Talk About Bruno from Encanto. But we don't talk about you know, which is tests. But I know that as a student, particularly from the countries that we're talking to tonight, tests have been a big part of your life. Your whole entire life, you've been taking lots of tests. And they have defined some moments for you all. And so as we transition to talking about test-free, I wanted to start with what do you think a test score does tell about a student? If you were a teacher, an administrator, an admissions officer, like if you saw a test score, what does it tell you about the student? I know it's always a little hard to get started with a chat question, but don't be afraid. And I want to make sure, can you all chat? Maybe you can. Let's see. Go. Okay, now you can chat. Go to the chat box. It looked like you guys were blocked. Go to the chat box and tell me, what does a test score tell you about a student? And as you guys are typing, oh, how much effort? Okay, great. Effort you put in, that could tell us something about a student. Your ability to study. Yeah. Like, how do you take in information? And some people are saying higher score equals smarter. How intelligent a student is, their proficiency level, their strengths and weaknesses. How do you perform under pressure? Students' academic interests, academic performance, academic potential. These are great. This is exactly what I think the original idea 5,000 years ago in China, when they were like, we need to have a standardized test, is that's what they were hoping for, to be able to see like your performance and how hard you work. And so I know that in the past few years, transitioning to test optional and then test free and test blind and all these words, suddenly you're like, wait, these were things that showcased my ability. Like, and now you're taking that away. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and how you're able to show all these things that you just put in the chat about academic potential and your proficiency and how intelligent you are and how much effort you put in. What other ways that you're able to show that in the application process? So my next chat question is, what is a strength or value of yours that doesn't come across in the test score that you think is important? So start putting those in the chat. I'm going to actually open up the chat to everyone so everyone can see. Okay, creativity, personality, yep, personal characteristics, your social skills, intelligence, yep, leadership. Great, great. These are great. Your ability to communicate, be creative, work with others. Empathy, that's huge. You cannot show somebody how empathetic you are on a test score or how you serve the community. These are great. These are fantastic. And these are all things that you yourself would want in a classmate, right? Like if you think about going to college, you want to be with smart people, sure. But what you really want is people who are going to be kind to you, who are going to be collaborative with you, who are going to be kind of coming up with research ideas together, things like that. So this is a great start to our conversation. San and V, anything to add of like things that, when they come up on through the application, make you light up, like some strengths or values that you're able to see in the application process?
I think my favorite part, well, in many applications, student talks about themselves, focusing on themselves. I think that's very important because we really want to get to know the student beyond their academic, whatever, A's and B's, all the academic that they get. We want to know them as a person. So when it comes to the application, it shows them as a person. I think it really helps us to understand what is important to the students and what kind of things that they can bring to our campuses.
I would totally agree with that. I think the other thing that's really important that we value beyond the test scores, even when the test scores were a part of the UC application, which obviously they're not anymore, is that it helps us understand what's distinctive or different about the student. So often test scores can all be the same, right? They flatten people out versus when you have, a personal insight question, when you have a UC application, there's so much more to be able to learn. So that's, as San said, it's all about the individual and it's all about understanding who you are and what really drives you and what you're passionate about.
Yeah, awesome. Well, so everyone here is like, yeah. I know, like you want to get to know my personality. But let's talk a little bit about the nitty-gritty. So we'll start with, just because the UC system is definitely different than other applications that most of these students are working on. So let's start with the timeline, just so that we're on the same page. Thank you so much for giving us this diagram, San and B. So everyone, here you go. Here is the timeline, and we're kind of in the part of time where the application is open, and and people should start working on it, obviously. What are some important things to like remember, San and B, from this kind of diagram here? What are things that people kind of forget or don't realize about this timeline?
Well, I'm going to jump in and kind of talk a little bit about after you apply. I think for a lot of students, they apply and then they think the application sort of goes into this black hole and disappears entirely. So what is happening while you are, after the actual filing deadline is that's a really important time to continue to always be checking your email and interacting with all of the different University of California campuses you applied to, because we're still sending you important information. We're still giving you important details. And then the other thing to keep in mind is when we get towards the end and you've made your decision about where you want to actually attend UC Santa Cruz, really truly understand our offices are dealing with thousands of different applications from students across the California and the US and the world. So sometimes if you don't hear back right away, we're so sorry. We want to get back to you right away, but just can't do it. So be patient with us is what I'd say. So just a couple of things, I just want to jump in there and share that real fast.
Great.
I'd say right now at this point for the seniors that you're applying, I know you're nervous, I know you're stressed, but you might procrastinate. That's just how it is, right? That's just how it is. And I'm going to tell you that the UC application itself, it's only for University of California, all 9 campuses. You can decide where you want to go. You can decide what major you want to apply. But the biggest thing is really spend time on it. I always tell students that the UC application is not a difficult application. I have done it myself. Bea had done it herself. We go through it every year. Not that we submit the application because you actually have to pay if you do submit, but we both actually go into the application and play around with it. It is a time-consuming process, but I would encourage you. We're right now in September. You can submit anytime in October and anytime in November, whichever lucky day that you think it is. It doesn't matter which day to us. Submit it the day you want it to. But spend a little time every week just to work a portion of it. It will really help you to, finish. And many of you actually have amazing counselors, especially the ones that from the sponsor schools. I know you all have amazing school-based counselors that give you deadlines, that helps you little by little. So listen to them, listen to the advices, follow the internal deadline, do it bit by bit so you're not stressed out the last week of November. That's usually the panic kicks in and things. But we're in September right now, so create your portal if you haven't already. Start working on it because it takes time. It's not difficult. We ask you very straightforward questions. And sometimes it does not let you move on if you don't answer the question. If you're just like, I don't know what it is, I'm going to skip it. It doesn't work. So you kind of have to go through that. And many of your school counselors actually have really good experience with the UC application, so they would be able to advise you. And many of them actually have direct access to admission officers like Beatrice and myself. So you really are in good hands. So make sure you talk to your counselors, ask them questions, and they would, connect with us if they don't understand or they don't know. So make sure you talk to them, listen to them. They are your, best resources right now.
Yeah, and it's so great that you guys are coming to these talks because that's like half the battle is just really like dialoguing and asking good questions and not just kind of going through autopilot or what you think everybody else is doing. Do ask questions because you've got counselors on this call who are trying to get up-to-date information. So, all right, well, so moving on from the timeline, of course, everyone's like, well, now that you're test-free, like, what are you looking at? And I love that you guys are like, we've been looking at these things all along. And I know it feels different, but here are the same factors, just minus one of the, before it was 14 and now it's 13. I think people are able to see this from, University of California Systems website, but any things to highlight from these 13 And maybe even San and B, if you want to, you know, some of those comments early on in the chat, you know, what people thought test scores are supposed to measure. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how you're still looking for that in the 13 factors, but how that comes across besides the test score.
I always tell students when we look at an application, you put in a lot of information there. And one thing to keep in mind is that the UC application, it's online. Everything you put in the application is everything we're going to see. So if you didn't put it there, you cannot assume that we know. I'd say that's why we keep saying, spend time on the application, take your time telling us your personal, stories, your circumstance, if anything is preventing you from getting good certain grades or certain classes and things like that, explain yourself. But I think one thing with a lot of students might have that questions about like, oh, I'm in this IB school. Should I go and take AP classes or AP exams by myself? And the answer is always no. Stick with your school curriculum. If it's available to you, it's available to you. If it's not available to you, if you want to add it on top of your like Gaokao or whatever Indian, 12 exams, things like that, we would not recommend that because we want to make sure that you are making the most of what is available to you. So when we're looking at your academic history, we will look at your grade 9, 10, 11, 12. And we'll be asking you what kind of curriculum you're doing, if you're doing AP, if you're doing IB, if you're doing your national ones, wherever you're from. We look at all kind of curriculums. There's no one that's better than the other. So obviously AP is more common in the US, but it's not something that we're like, you have to have. So I'd say stick with your school curriculum, report all your grades as they are. That's something that's very important to the UC application. Make sure you have your unofficial transcript right next to you, and we want it word for word. For the subject, what is called whatever grading scale that you're using. If they're 1 to 100, do 1 to 100. If they're 1 through 9, do 1 through 9. If they're 1 to 7, A through F, whatever grading scales you have. We have seen it all. So don't worry, just put in all the, grading scale and pick the appropriate one. If you don't see the grading scale that you have at your school, just pick other and you'll be able to tell us what the scale is like and we will convert it into the grade point average, the GPA.
Everything San said, 100%, I want to agree with. And I just want to add a couple of things. So a lot of you were saying, okay, well, tests can measure quality of my study, my ability to focus. Some of you felt intelligence. So let's talk about what that is and where in these 13 and in the UC application we see that in different places. So for instance, a lot of you were saying, okay, well, my ability to study. Well, your self-reported academic record, which is a main part of the UC application, that tells me everything about your ability to study, how many classes you've taken per year, the rigor of those classes, how well, obviously your marks in those classes. That tells me day in and day out, how were you studying? How focused were you? So that's a really important place in the UC application, obviously, but it's not the only place where I think we can see academic interest and achievement. The reality is that, when you go through and you're filling in your activities and awards section and answering those questions about your personal insight questions, those are also opportunities for you to demonstrate your passion for an academic subject, your passion for being involved in different intellectual pursuits, be it inside the classroom or outside of the classroom. So the reality is that, we can see, I think, interest and intellectual curiosity way beyond test scores. That's demonstrated, like I said, through your self-reported record, but through those activities and awards, through those personal insight questions that you've been doing. So it's not just in that one limited way that you can demonstrate your capacity and your capabilities. So as San said, you want to make sure, fill in your self-reported record accurately, just as it appears on your official records. If you have any of those different marks, if it's 0 to 100 or 0 to 120, you have sections in the UC application where you can actually tell us what that is in the additional comments section. So that's a really important piece too. Use those additional comment sections to help whomever is reading your application to understand everything that you've achieved and everything that might be in your application. But think about the fact that we are reading the entire application from beginning to end. And within each part of it, we're looking for all of these different 13 criteria in each part. It's not just, oh, this section is for this and this section is for this. But the reality is that you're being able to demonstrate your capacity and your capabilities in each section.
So I'm realizing as I'm seeing some of these questions come in that we do have audience that understand, yes, it's test free. That means no, we don't even look at those, but there are some people who are still not clear. So let's make sure we clarify that. The UC system is, what is the test policy currently for the UC system for the foreseeable future?
We're test free, meaning test blind. The UCs will not be using SAT or ACT test scores while making an admission decision or awarding scholarship. If you choose to submit the test score as part of your application, this may be used as an alternative method of fulfilling the minimum requirements for your course placement after you enroll. And I'm actually reading this word by word from the UC website. So really, we do not look at your tests. Basically, when we review your application, none of the admission officer will have access to your test scores. None. So it doesn't matter to us. Test free, test blind,
even if you're like, I did so well, and I really want to submit it, and you submit it to the UCs, these people who are reviewing your application, they don't see it. They don't see it anywhere.
Even if you put it in the additional comments, Gloria, it's going to be taken out. We are
thank you for saying that.
Okay.
Did you guys get that?
Not
so
there.
If you put it in an essay, an additional comment, and a PIQ, it's going to be redacted. Like there are people who process applications, right? Is that what happens? Yeah, people are processing applications for the readers. The reviewers are not going to see those test scores. So,
and even if for some reason it was still there, we would just ignore it. It would just be like, just completely ignored.
Yeah. Yeah. So very different than test optional, which you guys have heard about from some other Tuesday talks we've had. This isn't an option. It's just not there. It's just not there. And, it's what Sam was reading at the end of that. That was saying, like, if you submit that, that's like after you've already been admitted to the schools, and then they reopen kind of that stuff that was redacted earlier to see if you can get any requirements or credits or things like that, right? Yeah. Okay, good. Yes. So making sure we clarify that so everyone in the audience understands. You don't need to, and you should not worry about the ACT or the SAT for the UC system, right?
Correct. I did just see, though, in that chat, the question was asked about TOEFL. TOEFL, yes. So it's just to say SAT or ACT. So for all of you who've been doing Duolingo, who have TOEFL, who have IELTS, who have International Baccalaureate, or IGCSEs or A-levels, there is a section in the UC application for international exams and English proficiency. That we absolutely see and is absolutely a part of your application. So when we say test free, it really is specific to SAT, ACT.
Yeah.
So we will still need the English proficiency if you're coming from a school that English is not the teaching medium. And also, I think there are different layers to it. It's pretty much is if you're coming from a country that English is not the official language and your school is not teaching everything in English. Say if you go to an American school and everything is taught in English, then if you've been there for more than 3 years, you're probably fine. right? So there's different layers too, like how to fulfill your English proficiency. So TOEFL, IELTS, all the exams that Beatrice mentioned, any of them, it's fine with us. But when we say test free specifically, really, it means that no SAT, no ACT, that's all.
Great. So then I want to go back a little bit to what we were talking about with, like, if you are in an IB program and then you take AP exams, like, so these test scores are seen or could be seen, right? But you're saying, look, if you're not in that curriculum, that doesn't add points, or does it? Like, I think that's the question.
I would say it's not about adding points or not. It's that you making the most out of what is available to you and sticking with your curriculum. In terms of the GPA calculation, when we look at the grade 9, 10, 11, 12, the exam scores actually doesn't get calculated. The AP exams doesn't get calculated into the GPA. So if you're taking an AP class in your school, yes, you will get a weighted GPA. If you're taking IB higher level subjects, if you're taking the AS, for A level, yes, you'll get a weighted GPA, which will boost your GPA by a little bit. But the exams is something that is different things, right? Because for the classes, those are classes that you're taking, it's within your curriculum. But if you're taking just additional exam, you're already doing like IBHL biology, and you're like, oh, I'm just going to take AP biology just to prove that I am really good at biology. I want to be a biology major, right? It's not going to help you because it's just going to take time from you for studying for your IB exams, which is your school curriculum, right? And second, you also, when we get your official document and grades and things like that, it doesn't give you the bonus units because we only count one. So for your IB higher level biology, we will give your college level credit for that. You cannot double dip in the same subject. So it really doesn't help in a sense. B, do you want to add?
Yeah, no, everything you've said, Santa, it really applies to the University of California across the board. If you are a student who wants to really demonstrate your passion for a particular subject, there are so many other ways to do that I would recommend beyond just taking another test. Because as San said, one, you can't get double credit in terms of honors or even college credit. Because, if you take the AP exam and you get a 3 or above, you'll get college credit. Or if you take the IB higher level exams, then you can get 5 and above, you'll get college credit, which is wonderful, but we're not going to give you college credit twice, is what Sam's saying for the same subject area. Okay.
Yeah.
So you've taken the IB curriculum and now you're taking the AP exam too. What could you be doing with that time instead?
Mm-hmm.
Could you be, doing a science fair? Could you be running a community, science program for younger children in some way? Could you contribute to an environmental cause? Like, what other ways could you be demonstrating your passion for that subject other than just studying for tests?
Yeah, so I'm going to interpret one of these questions that are in the question box about, so let's say I'm in an IB curriculum and I love physics, but we don't have IB physics at our school. Like, we just don't have that course. Should I go and take an AP physics class on my own, or should I do something else? I think that's, I think that's a question that a lot of people have. Like, well, I don't have that class, but I really want that class, and so I'm going to take it.
I think that's a great question. And so this is what San has been saying, and I would be saying too, over and over and over again, context. When you tell me in your UC application, which you can do in the additional comments section or in a PIQ, my school doesn't offer this. So I went and sought it out myself. And this is what I did to try and engage in that subject, whether it was taking the test or taking the class or going into, like I said, a different community program or pursuing it independently. That is a very, very different perspective for me than just I have an IB curriculum and I wanted to take the AP test too, or vice versa. Okay. But that is so about the context of your educational environment. And you're telling me I didn't have this, so I pursued it on my own. tells me a lot about who you are. So that's a very different scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes students might be like, well, I really want to do this class, it's not available to me. So in the summer, I did an online course at this, edX or whatever platform that you use. That's great, right? It might not be able to calculate towards your GPA calculation, but it does show us that you're really passionate about this subject. And possibly that might be your major. And that helps us to understand how this is important to you. But it's not a checkbox. I was like, I'm going to do AP, I'm going to do IB, I'm going to do, there's no such a thing that as a checklist of like, if you have so many checks, you're going to get in or not, like it doesn't work like that. So like,
Right. And so if your
it's
school
really
doesn't
about the
have,
context.
yeah. So if your school doesn't have a number of classes and you actually you're not into those classes, don't take a bunch of AP classes just to take more classes, or don't take a bunch of AP exams just to have a bunch more scores. Take the AP physics just because you love physics and you're like, I wish I could take physics and there's no other way to take it. And I want to learn the material because you only have 24 hours a day. And some of that should be sleeping, by the way, because your brain will work better if you sleep.
It's so true. Yeah,
so if
definitely,
you-
definitely. And definitely, give us the context of my school didn't have this, so I pursued it. It's very different than they didn't have that class, and so I went and took these 10 other classes, like Gloria is saying. That's not what we're saying. Big difference.
Awesome. Okay, well, I do want to kind of spend just a very brief moment talking a little bit about what review looks like for you all, because as we mentioned earlier, there's processing that happens before evaluators actually evaluate. So if you guys can just talk real briefly about how the pipeline comes through, how the funnel works, and like, and earlier, I think people were saying, because the 13 factors were so beautiful, they were color coded. They're like, does the color coding mean anything? Like, is one more important to you? Look at that first or second or third. And I know B mentioned earlier, we're looking at the 13 factors in every single section. It's not, check the box, 1, 2, 3, 4, 13. But if you guys can kind of mention a little bit, even personally, how it comes to you, like when the file is presented to you, like do your eyes go somewhere first? What is your thought process? Are you thinking like, please don't disappoint me, like at different parts of the reading? So if you guys could kind of give us a little color on how it all works through the funnel.
All right. So when we are looking, so specifically for UC Davis, I'm going to, talk real like how it works at Davis is that when you apply to us, obviously your application is going to come to us. Before that, all that happened, right? So in November is a very busy month for us. But we also every year, each of the UC campuses will have what we call training before we all read, even though, B might have been doing this for 20 years, I'm doing it, 10 plus years, but every year we actually have to refresh that tools because also things changes, right? So we all have to get refreshed every year on things, how we do and what we do, what's working, what's not working. One thing that I really love it when we were planning this, talk that we talked about, Beatrice mentioned, it's like really no one person can make that decision of if you're in or not. Keep that in mind. None of us, we can't, if somebody's going to tell you that, I'm going to help you and you're going to get into this school because I know somebody, that is not true. That can never be true. So within the UC applications, all of your applications going to go to real people. So it will be read by at least 2 human beings. It will go through 2 human beings. So in Davis, the way it works is that your application will be read by at least 2 readers, and we will make our recommendation as to, if we're recommending student for admissions to Davis, if, maybe or not, or yes, no, maybe, just kind of those kind of situation, right? So we make our recommendation and we talk about it as, admission officers. The one thing that's very unique about in Davis is that our team, the international admissions teams, we actually specialize in different regions. What it means is that each of us has a knowledge of the places that the countries that we specialize in. So I started as specializing in China and then kind of expanded to the rest of Asia. So what it means is that sometimes I would get the first read for, certain countries and certain regions. And then when we're doing our training, we will train each other as to, okay, so when you're reading this country, this happens. So, for example, we all know that in Shanghai and many cities in China, AP were canceled, even though the rest of the world, AP was fine in 2022. Right. But in China, you will see that students will keep saying that, oh, it's canceled, it's canceled. And some students will still be able to take it because there are some, exceptions for some, schools and things like that. So when we're doing the training in November, that's what we talk about is that, okay, what's the new, what's changing, and what are the things that we should be keeping in mind. So after when we have that training, we actually have to pass our training too. We do some training cases. And if you don't pass, it's really bad when you don't pass because it's like you've been doing it for so long. So you kind of have to get it until you pass. And then once you pass, you'll get your files, and then you will start reading. So there's like a good 2-3 months that we're just kind of in like a hibernate hole. I guess I always want to tell people it's like we kind of hide and read like 10-12 hours every day. Some of us do spend more time and some of us don't, but that's kind of the average, I'd say. And then once we go through that, once we make the recommendations and things like that, then there's the whole selection process. And then we'll work with our faculty, and then we'll work with different colleges, majors, and things like that to make sure, we are admitting the class and how we envision for this incoming class. So every year could be a little different. And I want to back up a little bit. If say the two readers don't agree with each other's recommendation in Davis, it actually go to a third person. So they are usually our senior evaluators that have been doing this for many, many, many years. And then they will look at all the notes that we make when we do the reading and kind of evaluate and then make that recommendation. So that kind of go through a few people. And sometimes we'll be like, okay, as a group, let's talk about this student and just kind of norm it out and see how we feel. So it really depends. And sometimes, it takes a little longer for certain files and some don't. And some students, if they have like 4 different schools that they went to or different curriculums that I might not be familiar with, I might be reaching out to counselor, I might be reaching out to my team, I might be reaching out to Beatrice and be like, hey, do you have experience with, this school and things like that? Or do you have a counselor contact and things like that? So we rely on each other a lot in that process. And then once the selection process it's go from the admission office to our faculty and kind of work together with the colleges and things like that. And then in March, we'll be releasing our decisions. So it's a very long process, but with very limited time. So it goes by actually quite fast. That's pretty much how we do in Davis.
Absolutely. Pretty much almost identical in Santa Cruz. For us at Santa Cruz, the thing that I always appreciate so much is that we're reminded of during our training, which also happens in November and is led by, what we call senior international evaluators. So while we don't read and specialize by country like Davis does, we're being taught how to read the application by individuals who've been reading international applications for some of them 20 or plus years. So they've seen it all. Trust me, they really do know what they're doing. But the thing that I always so gratified by and reminded of is it's our faculty in our classrooms who are deciding who they want to join them in their classrooms. And let me explain what that means. What that means is we have these 13 criteria. They're the same across the UC system, but our faculty at each of our campuses, they actually have a committee and they get to tell us as admissions staff, here's what we want most. Here's how we think, we are going to find the students we want in our classroom. And this is why, even though we're using the same 13 criteria, it's the same. But this is why you can have a student who gets admitted to Santa Cruz and may not get admitted to Davis, or maybe gets admitted to Davis and not to Santa Cruz for some reason. And I know this is really challenging for counselors and for students to understand. It's like, but it's the one application. It's the same application. How is this possible? And this is why. It's because our faculty at our campuses specifically are saying, you in admissions and undergraduate admissions, This is what we want you to focus on most within those 13 criteria, okay? And it's the same thing, and I really want to emphasize what San said, is we in admissions, we're making recommendations based on that criteria that the faculty is guiding us for whether a student should be admitted or not. And then it's selection. And let me tell you, I don't do selection. San doesn't do selection. That is outside of the undergraduate admissions office. It's really managed by enrollment management and by faculty. So I know so often students and families and counselors may be like, but what is the magic formula? What is it that is happening? And trust me when I say the magic is you filling out the application and filling it out as well and as thoroughly as possible. That is the magic. Beyond that, it's not something that you can control. So do everything you can to fill out the application well. That's the part you can control.
Okay, but I will ask, because there's these threshold questions, right? There's like, they're like, well, but there must be kind of a minimum that you need to be admissible, in the UCs, and there are many UCs, and those have different kind of thresholds. And there's a question here about like rank, like is, if it says identification by the UC as being ranked in the top 9% of your high school, like what does that mean? And also there's a question here like, well, my school doesn't rank or my school doesn't offer a GPA. So then how do you even look at that? So I know like we're like, there are 13 factors, but I think people are a little anxious about that academic threshold. Like there's gotta be something where we just don't meet it anymore. Like no matter how charismatic and wonderful I am as a person, if I'm not able to show you that GPA or that rank, then I'm, I shouldn't consider this school. So any insight on that?
So a couple of things. So first off, you're totally right to talk about the top 9%. So that can be pretty confusing, especially for students who are outside of California. That is specific to students in California. So
okay.
it is not looked at
Not
for
relevant.
international students. You don't have to worry about that at all. Just take that one off the plate for you. Yeah, don't worry about that. Okay. So second thing, students are saying, well, I don't have a GPA in my school. This is okay. You have no idea how many, we get applications from around the world, literally, who have different grading scales and different things. This is why humans like San and I read your application, because that way there is at no point does an application hit our system and just get completely booted. It never happens. A human is always reading your application. And so when it comes in and we see, okay, there's no GPA, I'm going to be looking in the academic self-reported record, in the additional comments section, everywhere I can in that application to understand what the student's curriculum is, to then be able to calculate some sort of GPA for the student. And to answer your question, Gloria, yeah, a student's got to have a 3.4 GPA if they're coming from if they're an international student. A 3.4 GPA is the minimum UC GPA. But again, at no point, if it comes in and your application doesn't have a GPA, or even if you don't have a 3.4 exactly, that does not mean your application doesn't get read. It does get read, even then, by a human. Okay, and a recommendation one way or the other is still going to be made on that application. Okay, now are there stronger applications than others? Absolutely, absolutely. So what we're looking for is that you have been taking the academic preparation courses that are required for your country or that are available in your international school. So we do want to see roughly about 15 courses, academic courses in history and math, science, social science, these types of things. But like in the US, we expect to see US history. I'm not reading an application from China expecting to see US history. That is not going to be something I'm looking for, okay? We're really looking to see, do you have a 3.4 GPA? Have you taken an academically rigorous college preparatory course load?
I think one other thing is that, well, while we don't hold you against if you don't have US history, you cannot just be taking all science classes. You have to have your math, you will have to have your English, you will have to have your science, you will have to have your social science and things like that. So we want a good balance of your academics. So make sure that you have the good balance. And I think like Beatrice was saying that when you are actually reporting all your grades and what if they're AP, if they're whatever curriculum they are, even if they're like French bag or whatever, like 1 to 20, it doesn't matter. It is totally fine, really. We will calculate the GPA for you. And I know you're curious on how we calculate the GPA. So a very simple way of putting it is that for any of your AP, IB, higher level, as well as your AS subjects, we'll be using the weighted GPA scale. Generally speaking, an A is a 4.0. An A in the AP classes, not the exam, the class, IB higher level class, AS, they will be weighted, meaning your A will be a 4.5 instead of a 4.0. Okay. So there's no secret to that. It really is. We're giving you the bonus because, they are a little more rigor than just a regular class and things like that. If you're telling us, oh, it's an honor class in my school, but it's not AP, it's not IB, are they going to be calculated in the weighted GPA scale? Unfortunately, no. But you can still tell us it's honor. You can still tell us, in our school, it's something that, you have to have a certain grades to actually, be in the honor class and things like that. Still tell us that, because we do want to know that you might have a mix of, AP classes and, your honor class or IB or honor class or just honor classes and things like that. And again, like Beatrice said, utilize that additional comment in the academic history as well as your personal insight questions. Those are the spaces that you can explain yourself. You can give us more context. You can tell us what is available to you and what's not available to you. And as Gloria was asking about the GPA, so the last couple of years, we also have students taking classes as to their pass, no pass. So what that means is that it doesn't actually impact your GPA because they're pass or no pass. So we just need to know that you took the class, and you might have a year for that. And that's totally fine. In the UC system, we understand, the pandemic happened, it's still happening. Your grades might be impacted by that. Again, additional comments, use that space.
This is all really great, and like all your answers are leading to more questions. But I'm like realizing we only have like 10 more minutes left, so I want to make sure that we get to the heart of what some of you came to listen about, and that is actually PIQs. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the PIQs just really briefly, because there's a lot of other stuff that these are really great questions, by the way. Audience, you guys are doing a really great job tonight. But let's talk about PIQs, because that is something that's a little bit more in your control. If you're a student, right? Like, you've done the work and you've got to be able to present it clearly to these admissions officers that are reading so that they understand what classes you've taken, how you've done in them. But here is something that's completely in your control. So I'm just going to jump and cut to the chase here. What are the biggest mistakes you see in the PIQs? Like, what is the goal of them for you? Like, what is your hope? You're like, please tell me this in your PIQ. And then where do you see it all falling apart? Because,
okay.
Yeah, go.
Love it. Okay. Biggest mistakes. Students waste time. They try and set the scene. They're trying to be all flowery and romantic in their language. Don't waste your time. Get to the point. Get to the point. I don't have a lot of time, and you don't either. In only 350 characters, get to the point. Okay, so that's one of the biggest mistakes I see. The second biggest mistake is students try and be very kind of general and grandiose. Don't be general and grandiose. Give me detail. Give me specifics. If you're going to tell me I'm a leader, okay, great. What does that mean? How many, I was responsible for leading a team of 19 students as we developed a project for our international program that we were doing. I was responsible for organizing all of our meetings and making sure that we were meeting all the criteria. That is very different from I was the leader of our international school club. Do you see the difference there? Huge difference. Okay. So that to me, two biggest things: be concrete, be specific, get to the point.
Great. Good advice.
Everything Beatrice said, and I think be direct, answer the question. And one thing that we do keep seeing is that there might be some students that are super passionate about one thing, right? For example, dancing, right? This student could be dancing since kindergarten, and they use dancing to answer all 4 questions. It doesn't tell us anything new. Unless you can tell us, you can definitely talk about dancing. That's your passion, that's your life, but try it different angles, right? Give us example, be concrete. Try to tell us different examples. Try not to repeat things just because you are going to be wasting your space. And we call it missed opportunity. What we're trying to do on top of your academics that you give us, the information that you give us, on top of the activities of work, clubs, things like that, we just kind of want to get to know you, because that really adds into, explaining your academics, explaining your activities, explaining who you are. So really use that space to add value to your application instead of missing that opportunity by repeating yourself or talking a lot about other people like your classmates, your family, your grandparents. I know you love them, but we don't need to get to know them yet. So yeah.
And this is all, similar to other Tuesday Talks, not even about UCs. We are talking about use every piece that you're submitting to give a piece of information that might be new, because you aren't just, some of you are spiky and some of you might be there's one thing important in your life. But for most of you, you've been doing a lot of things, and there's only so many characters and words that are available for you. So we do want to encourage people, introduce something new, give them, and B just said, it's out of my control once I give the recommendation, and so you need to give her enough evidence to be able to write those compelling notes for the faculty and the selection committee to say, yes, that's the student that I want in that classroom. So
and don't be afraid to talk about how something was hard. If something was hard for whatever reason, that's totally okay to talk about. But then tell me how you push through that. Tell me, demonstrate for me how you really showed your determination and how you kind of persevered through something in order to be successful. So if you're going to share something that was really challenging, which is completely appropriate, if something's happened, that's impacted your life or your academics while you've been in secondary school and high school, it's important to talk about that. But then tell me about how you worked with it. What did you do to try and take advantage of any resources to be successful still? And that's the last thing I would add, just as a reminder. We want to know what's happened to you in the last 4 years, basically. If something happened when you were younger, unless it's still really impacting you in a major way, it's just not as relevant to us. So keep it current.
Yeah, great. And I know in a previous UC talk, we also mentioned the writing is not it's not a literary competition here. We're not talking about having a Nobel Prize winning or what's the thing I'm thinking about? But anyway, the point is we're not talking about flowery, beautiful English writing. We're talking about content.
It's not an essay. It's really a question that you're answering directly. So if you're funny, you can be funny. If you're not, don't try to be in writing because it's hard to convey that message. So, and also, I think Gloria, what you're trying to say, I think it's that none of us are English teachers. None. We're not going to be checking on your grammar. It'll be great if you can spell, because that's essential, right? But there's also, autocorrect or whatever. But what I'm trying to say is that we're not going to grade you on your grammar or spelling or writing format or the structure, because we just try to get to know you. But do make sure that everything makes sense and read it, write it in draft, have your counselor look at it for you, review it, your teacher that you trust or who have known you for years, ask them, what is missing in this writing? Do you get to know me a little bit better after you read this piece? I think that's very important, because if they're like, well, it doesn't really tell me anything about you, it's really not you, because they know you, right? So make sure that you're giving it to people who know you for a while, your teachers or your counselors, to provide feedback for you, because that is going to help us to get to know you a little bit better.
This is
Wonderful.
why we opened up the application earlier too, so you can have more time to fill it out and work with it. I'm just saying, don't wait till the end.
Yes, don't wait till the last minute. Do not procrastinate, and get people to give you feedback and help you think through. So obviously, the hour just always flies by, and there were questions that were not answered. The wonderful thing is that these institutions and other UCs are having lots of their own virtual info sessions and counselor meetups and all sorts of I think there's a counselor meetup tomorrow. And so definitely reach out, because these answers are actually available. And I just wanted to close, San and B, any parting words of advice, last Jayo kind of comments that you might want to make before we say goodbye.
I would just say the UC wants you to be you. We want you to be who you are, and we want you to be successful at our institutions. That is our number one goal. So fill out your own application. Don't let anyone else do it for you. Check your email, do the very best you can, and then know after you turn in the application, there's nothing more that you can kind of do. You've done all the hard work, and now it's for people like San and I to do our hard work.
100%. Thank you, Beatrice. The other thing that is it kind of along the line, I'd say you are students. You are on the driver's seat, not your counselors, not your parents, not your agents, not the outside people. Really, you are in the middle, you're in the center of this process. And if the more involved you are in this process, the more likely that you're going to succeed. Because once you go to university, once you go to college, you are on your own. Nobody is going to help you. Of course, you're going to have your advisors, you're going to have your counselor, but you literally, you're the one who's going to get on the airplane and come over. So, so really, the more involved you are in this process, and parents, if you can let it go a little bit, just let them own this process a little bit more, that you are going to be surprised how capable your student is. So trust them, trust your school counselor. Again, really rely on them, ask them questions. If they don't know the answer, they're going to find you the answer. So really, really utilize these resources and go to all those Tuesday talks, because they cover so many different topics that is so important for you to know. Just going to college and, being successful in general, because you're going to get so many information out of it.
Thank
Tuesday
you.
talks are amazing. Listen to your counselors. They know what they're talking about. Please listen to your counselors. And yes, thank you so much, Gloria. Tuesday talks are such a great resource for everybody. Pleasure to always be able to join you.
We're so glad that you joined us, and we know it's really, really early for B and really, really late for San. So I really appreciate you guys spending time with us. So I'm going to let you all have a rest and take care. For those of you who are still hanging on, we are here to answer any questions about Initial View. If you're like, I don't really understand what Initial View does, I'm hanging out here. I have a colleague hanging out here. So you're welcome to stay on. We'll be on for another 15, 20 minutes. But San and B, thank you so much. Have a really great night, morning, day, wherever you are. Thanks, everyone. And for those of you who are going to log off, next week's Tuesday Talk is specifically about women's colleges. So if you're a woman and would like to consider whether or not a women's college is the best for you, definitely tune in next Tuesday. All right, take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, if you want to send Mr. View, I'm typing it into the chat, guys. Contact@initialview.com. If you got that screenshot, you can send it to contact@initialview.com. All right, thank you. Bye, San. Bye, B. All right, for those of you who are hanging on, we're so excited that you're hanging on. For those of you who don't know, Initial View is a platform that allows you to do a video interview. It's unscripted. It is a great way to add information, and you can send that to as many schools as you want. And so my colleague and friend here, Yokun, is here. She actually used to be an admissions officer at Swarthmore College, and she is now getting her master's and also interviewing for Initial View. And she has watched probably thousands, do you think, Yokun, of interviews, and has done many hundreds of interviews as well. So she's a great resource to kind of answer any questions you might have about that. So Yokun, I'll let you take it away. Great to see you.
Good, thank you, Gloria. Hi, everybody. Good morning, evening, afternoon to you, depending on where you're tuning in from. Like Gloria said, I'm currently an interviewer with Initial View. If you have any questions about what we do with Initial View, how the interview works, any questions you have around what that looks like on the admissions side, because I also used to be an admissions officer, feel free to pop your questions in the Q&A box or using the chat box. You can also private message me, and I'll go over the questions in the order that they come in. And I do have a little PowerPoint just so you have something to reference. So let me share that as we tackle some questions. All right, so, and I'm just going to quickly go over some of these things with you, and I see the questions are coming in, so we'll get to those in a little bit. All right. So what is Initial View? What do we do? So it is a 15-minute unscripted conversation that you have with an interviewer, so one of Initial View's interviewers, and it's recorded on video. You know, we have a conversation that is guided by the interviewer, and we talk about the things that are important to you, things you want admissions officers to know. And then once you, either before or after you do the 15-minute interview, we also ask you to do a 20-minute timed response to an open-ended prompt. So you're able to do that either before or after the interview. And then once you're done, we send the whole package. When you're happy with it, we send the whole package to the schools that you're applying to that accept Initial View. So you can choose which schools that end up seeing your interview and your writing prompt. So that is what we do in just a few sentences. And if you have been paying attention to, Tuesday Talks, something that we talk about a lot in admissions is holistic review, which means that there are many components to your application and every single part is important. So interview is one of those components, as you can see, together with essays and supplements and recommendation letters and your high school transcript. So on and so forth. And especially with recent years with COVID, sort of the emphasis, having less and less emphasis on test scores, a lot of schools going test optional, test free. You can see interview taking on even a bigger role, being that piece that sort of brings everything together in your application. So, and that is what we talk about when we say, every part of your application is important, and interview is something that really elevates and highlights certain parts of your application. And if you take a quick look at what colleges say about interviews and what they really get out of watching interviews or using that information, they want to get a sense of what you're like, right? Your personality. They want to get a sense of your English proficiency. And they also want to see how you potentially fit with the college, right? What do you hope to bring? What will you contribute to the campus community? And, more specifically, they want to get to know you as a person. As admissions officers, we read tons and tons of words and written documents about you. But the interview is really the only space where you get to, speak for yourself, and we get to hear your voice, get to know you as a person. And these are really all the wonderful reasons that colleges accept interviews, and we encourage students to do interviews, because lots of these qualities that colleges look for, whether it's kindness, whether it's intellectual curiosity, many of these things, don't get manifested as well in written format. And it's so much nicer and so much more, powerful to hear it from a student, right? And we also get to see how a student behaves in a classroom setting, especially when lots of classes in college are seminar style, where you get to have really in-depth conversations with your professors and your peers. So it's also another way for us to see what kind of student you might be like in a classroom setting. And the interview really is the only interactive piece of the process, right? We get to know the student. Whenever I've watched an initial interview, it felt like I was having a conversation with the student instead of just learning about the student on paper. And if you're curious what this all looks like from the admissions standpoint, this is sort of the admissions officer's view, on our application review platform, Slate. And usually initial view shows up as one of the tabs on the left. So you can see, there's like the personal information, there's the transcript, there's the recommendation letters, and at the bottom, there's initial view. And my habit when I was a admissions officer is whenever I opened up a file, I would go to initial view, click play on the video, and then as I was listening to the student talk, as I was listening to the student having with the interviewer, I would then go over the rest of the application, because it felt like I was talking to the student, or I was listening to the student. And a lot of times the questions that I had while reviewing the rest of the application, I will have answers listening to that interview, right? The student might be talking about their school context or their personal context as I'm reviewing the application. And then you'll see that there's a list of questions on the right. So these are the questions that are asked by the interviewer, and then the students get to answer. So what's the best time to do an interview? As soon as you have your college list. So the earlier, the better, because as you can know, things get really, senior year is a very stressful time, and then you'll have lots of stuff coming up later in the fall and winter. So, it's good. It's a good thing to get the interview sort of done early. And if you're happy with the result, then you're done, right? You can go ahead and send that to schools that you're applying to. And if you're not happy with it, you can always have another chance to redo the interview. So here's a link that you can use to book your interview with Initial View. And always feel free to shoot the Initial View team an email, and then you have the phone numbers as well if you have any questions. So I'm going to stop sharing here. Right. Let's see if folks have any questions that we can answer. So there's one question. So will the whole interview be reviewed by the university? So for the most part, yes, the whole interview will be watched and reviewed by the university. And I'll say that every admissions office sort of, handles the process a little bit differently. And most of the admissions officers I know, they will go ahead and click play on the video as soon as they open up a file. Some Initial View, some officers do it a little bit differently, but I would say yes, in general, we would watch the majority of the video. And then one nice thing about Initial View is that once a student reviews the final interview, the final product, they also have the option of choosing a question. So of highlighting a question for admissions officers, which means that if you think, hey, I think I had a really great answer to this question, or I felt like this part of the discussion was something I want admissions officers to pay extra attention to, you can highlight that particular question. So a lot of times when I open up a file, I'm sorry about the noise because there's rain outside. When I open up a file, I can see that question and be like, okay, here's something that the student really wants me to know. And sometimes I'll start with that question. But yes, in short, for the most part, the colleges and universities will watch the entirety of the video. Thank you for the question. So is there a list of colleges that use Initial Views? Yes, if you go on the Initial View website, you'll be able to see all the partner colleges. There are a couple hundred colleges, the majority of them are in the US that accept Initial View. And you can send your video to as many colleges as you would like who accept Initial View. So yes, the answer is yes. All right, so how much does it cost and how long does it take to finish an interview? So in terms of pricing, everything can also find that information on the Initial View website. And in terms of the timeline, so how long does it really take? We usually do sort of like a half-hour slot for each interview, and that includes time to get set up, to meet your interviewer, to make sure that all the tech stuff is in place, and make sure that you're not running into technical issues later on. And then the actual conversation that you have with the interviewer lasts about 15 minutes, sometimes a little less than that, sometimes a little more, but usually it hovers around the 15-minute mark. And that's the sort of the video interview portion. And there's also that write-up of 20 minutes. So usually before or after you do your interview, we give you a link and then it has all the instructions that you need to finish your writing sample. And that takes 20 minutes because it's a timed piece. So really, altogether, I would say about an hour to do both the interview and the 20-minute write-up. And okay, so there are a few more questions coming in. So here's a good question. So I heard the average review time is 8 minutes for each application. How does that reconcile with the length of the interview? So that is a really good question. And again, this depends on the type of review process of each admissions office. And for the most part, there are lots of applications that come in, and depending on sort of the file itself and the conversation that people have around that application, I would say the time that is spent on each application differs. And what's nice about Initial View is that it does show up with each file, whichever sort of point you are in the review process, you have on that application, because for a lot of colleges that do sort of holistic review and committee-based evaluations, you might have heard that term before, they see an application multiple times in the whole application season, right? So that might be, a first review, there might be second or third review. And, at least for myself in the office that I was in, we would always play the Initial View interview, whichever round that we were in, whichever part of the process that we were in. So we're able to really see the video in multiple times. And a lot of times it helps us answer some questions that we raise in that committee conversation. So I would say, as much as you might not be able to watch like the interview from the beginning to the end, for the most part, we're able to pick out the important parts of an Initial View interview, especially when lots of times we're able to get answers from that interview, questions that we raise in our committee process. So that is a great question. Thank you for that. And there's another one about redoing an interview. So if you're not happy with your interview, if you get your recording back and you're like, oh, I had a bad day and it wasn't a great interview, you are able to do it again. It is your, it is your choice to redo the interview. And we encourage students to, if you're happy with the first one, and if it's, we just encourage you to go with the first try, because a lot of times I think students think too much about it, and then, they end up doing the interview again and again. So if you think it's all right, then go with the first one. But if you're really not happy with it, yes, you can redo the interview. And can we do the interview remotely? So yes, so all the interviews right now are happening entirely virtually. You hop on the interview platform that we have, and then you connect with an interviewer remotely, and then we take a few minutes to make sure that all the tech stuff is in place, and then we record their interview. So yes, all of them are happening remotely right now. Right, any more questions that folks have? We have a few more minutes, but if people are happy, then we'll go ahead and end the session here. But I'll wait a minute just to see if there are more questions that come in. All right, awesome. It seems like we're able to answer all the questions that people had, at least so far. But thank you so much for staying on. We do this sort of Q&A after each Tuesday talk. So if you do have more questions later on, feel free to just stay on after next week or the week after the Tuesday talk. Thank you again, and everyone have a great day. Take care.